Hi, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Get Your Popcorn. I'm actually going to be releasing this on a Thursday. Aren't you guys proud of me? I'm back onto my regular schedule. This is our first movie we're doing in June, which is very exciting. And we are doing Black Panther. I gotta admit, guys, I am not a superhero movie person at all. I know this is like the most overdone take of like a movie buff ever, that like I'm too good for superhero movies and I think they're dumb. But I do really think they're dumb for the most part. I really am not a Marvel gal at all. It's not because I've just decided I don't like them. I have seen them, almost them all. I've seen all the ones released up until the summer of 2019. And that's when I stopped watching them. I'm not a big fan of them whatsoever. Captain America Winter Soldier is probably the only other one I like other than this. The first Guardians of the Galaxy is fun, and the music is obviously really fun too, but it's just really not my thing. If you like superhero movies, that's great. I'm happy for you. I don't. I just don't like action movies, or like a good portion of them, to be honest. I just don't need to watch shit blowing up for a while. I don't know. I don't like the Marvel universe, and they often cast people that I think are not very good actors, like Scarlett Johansson. Yeah, it's just not my thing. Anyway, so when this movie first came out, I knew nothing about it. I'm not a comic book gal either, other than Archie Comics. But yeah, I really didn't know what to think. I really didn't want to go and was sort of dragged against my will at the time and ended up being blown away. This film is awesome. It is so good. If you haven't seen Black Panther, I highly recommend it, even if you don't like superhero movies. I don't like superhero movies, even remotely, for the most part. But I think the big star, besides like everything else being incredibly well done in this film, Ryan Coogler, the director, now has an amazing ability to take a concept that sounds dumb and make it just like the best film you've ever seen. I haven't done a full review on it yet. I will once it comes out on DVD, but Ryan Coogler also directed Sinners, which came out this year, which is honestly in my top 5. It was ridiculously good. Black Panther isn't in my like top 5, top 10, but it is such a good movie. So it's based on the Marvel character of the same name, developed in the 1960s by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. This film was in development in and around the late 1990s. Wesley Snipes was the one sort of powerhousing this, and it kind of just spun its wheels for a long time in development hell. Ultimately, he decided to continue on with the Blade franchise. In the earlier iterations of the concept of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Black Panther was going to be included in the original 10 films that they had decided on. And then in 2014, it was announced that there would be a 2017 release date for this, and was ultimately pushed to 2018. So it was in development for like 20 years. So really long time. Ryan Coogler signed on to direct in 2016, which is the best thing that could have happened to this film. He was a fan of the comic books growing up, so he felt like the film was really personal, but he wanted to deviate a little bit from the typical formula of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and make it his own, which he did. And that's why this one is great, and the others are meh. And he used a lot of his people that he had used either in previous films or future films, we'll see. So a big one for that is Ludwig Göransson, who did Creed with him and will go on to do, not with him, but Oppenheimer, and now with Sinners for the music. We've got Rachel Morrison for cinematography, and we have Hannah Beachler, I think is her name. I don't know. I haven't heard it said out loud. Who worked with him before. She's actually the first female production designer in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. She drew a lot on pre-colonization architecture of the Mali Empire. She also took inspiration from Uganda, Rwanda, the Congo, Ethiopia, and South Africa. She made several trips out to South Africa. And here's a quote from her that I really like. "The question is, what is it to be African? It's of course our ancestry, but I've never been before. So my connection is always a question. So going there was pretty emotional. And I remember calling Ryan and just having a good cry, feeling this wonderment, this awe of what it really is. The world that I live in here, you're made to feel ashamed of Africa, but going there, it's not what you're shown." And so I think this is like a lot of the discussion that happens within the film that I'm not going to be able to fully touch on. There's a lot of care taken in this film to make it a celebration of Black history and Black culture with adding in these like superhero elements and this futuristic in order to make it extremely grounded, and elevate the story much more than any other film in the cinematic universe for Marvel. But of course, I mean, if you're watching this on video, or I mean, I've spoken about it a lot. Like I'm white, I'm like Irish, like this is not my culture. This is not, this is not a representation of anything that I'm going to have a particularly great understanding of. So I will touch on it from what the quotes and stuff that I'll read, as well as what is like sort of implied within the script and the story. But obviously, it would be rather tone deaf for me to sit here and lecture about a story that's not mine. I will do my best, but this is a very important film to see. It is a groundbreaking film because of how mainstream this film is. Like, this is a huge, huge thing and this huge celebration of Black culture, and so much time and care went into it, and that's a huge milestone. And it was a huge cultural moment when this came out. I remember the discussions about how important this film was because of the direction and the writing, the celebration of this character, and then real time being taken into ensuring that it was depicted in a way that gave it the gravity that it was. So there's some really, really good articles and interviews with the cast and the director and the production designer, and lots and lots and lots of articles that were written at the time because of this. I'm not going to touch into all of them because there's so much. Like, of all the films I've researched, this probably by far had the most information to go through. And because this is not a take where I feel like I'm going to be able to give as much nuance because it just isn't my story, I highly recommend going to those primary sources with those interviews. I will put links in the show notes to the ones that I used in order to pull quotes from and read from. But this film was huge. Despite what the right is trying to tell you, there is not good representation out there. How many white superheroes do we have? And we have one Black Panther. This is important. Representation is important, and accurate representation is even more important. And people being able to create these stories and these narratives for themselves so that it's reflected back on us, right? Like, it's very easy for somebody like me to turn on the TV and see somebody that looks like me, but that's not true for everybody. And it's a little sad that it took us all the way till 2018. They started having, like, when were the Christopher Reeve Superman movies? Like, in the 70s, right? Representation is really important. And representation that is done by the people it's representing is important. This film is historic. It's incredibly important. I'm not going to get too much into diving into that because I think you should hear from the people that made it. And so I'll put up the links in the show notes to the articles and stuff that I read. But yeah, representation is really, really important, guys. This is a really, really important film. So we'll get into the cast. We've got Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa. So he's the leader of Wakanda, or the Black Panther. Chadwick worked with a dialect coach, and he studied Nelson Mandela was primarily who he studied for his speech pattern. Michael B. Jordan plays Eric Stevens, or Killmonger. So he's the cousin of T'Challa, and for his character, he studied Malcolm X and Tupac, which I think is very interesting based on the characters that they play, that I feel like you can really see those traits that they would have tried to pick up on within the characters. Like, as soon as I read that, I was like, oh yeah, I can see that. Like, that's very much an inspiration that shines through in both of their performances. We have Lupita Nyong'o as Nakia. She's a love interest for T'Challa. We have Danny Guerrera as Okoye. She's the general of the Secret Service for the Black Panther. We have Martin Freeman, who plays Agent Everett Ross. He's CIA agent from America. We have Daniel Kaluuya as W'Kabi. He's a friend of T'Challa's, and he's also the representative for the border tribe within Wakanda. We have Letitia Wright. She plays Shuri, that's T'Challa's younger sister. She is head of tech, and she's sort of the innovator within the country of Wakanda. We've got Winston Duke, who plays M'Baku. He's the leader of the Jabari tribe. His character had to be changed quite a bit from the comics. In the comics, he is known as the Ape Man, and due to obvious reasons, they needed to change that. They did not by any means want to have any sort of association with Black characters and apes. So there is some more subtle, like, kind of nuanced ways in which they play homage to that original character. The gorilla is seen as a god within the Jabari tribe, and then they've got some light fur, and then there is a mask that he wears in one of the scenes in the film that does have a bit of a gorilla feature to it, but they were very careful, and there was a lot of discussion within Marvel and with everybody involved being like, how can we handle this in a way that isn't going to be hurtful? And I don't think I'm the best person to say whether or not they did that in an appropriate way. We have Sterling K. Brown as Njobu, which is T'Chaka's brother. That is T'Challa's father, and Killmonger, his dad, or Eric Stevens. We have Angela Bassett as the Queen Mother, or T'Challa's mother. We have Forrest Whitaker, who plays Zuri. He was T'Chaka's right-hand man, and he's sort of their religious leader. And we have Andy Serkis as Claude. So for costumes, they did their best to keep the Black Panther costume as close to certain elements of the comics as they could. Black Panther, A Nation Under Our Feet, was the basis of the Black Panther suit. There's also pretty extensive hair and makeup in a lot of these scenes. For instance, Killmonger has all these scars, one for every life he's taken, and it would take about 2.5 hours to put on all those scars every single day, and then another 2.5 hours to take them off. Okoye has head tattoos, so every day she'd have to have her hair shaved off and then those put on. It took about 3 hours every day. There's really important to have distinct costuming and hair for each of the different tribes, like the river tribe, the border tribe, and to make sure that they have a specific kind of color palette and played homage to different cultural practices, and took heavy inspiration from different tribes, real tribes, which you can see there's kind of a very distinct color palette for each and beautiful patterns. And so the costuming is gorgeous. So filming began in 2017 in January, and it was shot in Atlanta. There's also some scenes shot in Korea, as well as exterior shots in Uganda. It was released in January of 2018. That was its premiere. It made $1.3 billion with a B dollars on a $200 million budget. Black Panther was pretty much unanimously liked by critics. It's got a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. Odie Henderson, who writes for RogerEbert.com, gave it a 4 out of 4 and says the entire cast creates characters with complexities rarely afforded to minorities in cinema. These people are capable of contradictory human responses that have lasting consequences. Their feelings are deep, instantly relatable, and colored with the shades of gray not often explored in blockbuster entertainment. When the villain still manages to make your eyes tear up despite trying to murder the hero in the previous scene, you know you're in the presence of great acting and storytelling. Richard Roper from the Chicago Times said, if you're not normally into this genre, consider this. If you appreciate finely honored storytelling with a Shakespearean core, winning performances from an enormously talented ensemble, provocative premises on isolationism, revolution, and cultures of oppression, and oh yeah, tons of whiz-banging action sequences and good humor, then you should see Black Panther. And it's got a 3.7 on Letterboxd. So Black Panther was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Original Song, Best Sound Editing, Best Sound Mixing, Best Costume Design, Best Production Design, and Best Original Score. And it won for Best Costume Design, Best Production Design, and Best Original Score. This film is undeniably good, and its impact is huge. Again, I am really not the person to be breaking down why this film culturally is so important. I think it's much better to go and look at primary sources, as well as people who have cultural ties to this film talk about this. I feel like it would be pretty tone deaf of me as a white lady to lecture y'all on why Black Panther is important to the Black community. The story that was created by Ryan Coogler is important, has cultural impact for them, and it's important to hear them talk about it and why they felt that film was important. I know why, for me, I felt that film was important, and why I think being able to bring parts of African culture into mainstream media enough that, some white lady from Canada can sit in her small town and see it is important, because representation is important. And the more representation we have in media, the better. We want to see stories from all kinds of people. We want to see things through a different view lens. Let's get into the plot, guys, shall we? So we open the film and we hear a boy and his father talking. Later we'll learn that this is younger Killmonger and his father. And he says, "Baba?" He says, "Yes, my son. Tell me a story." Which one? The story of your home. And Nujobu says, millions of years ago, a meteorite made vibranium, and the strongest substance in the universe, struck the continent of Africa, affecting the plant life around it. And when the time for man came, 5 tribes settled on it and called it Wakanda. The tribes lived in constant war with each other until a warrior shaman received a vision from the panther goddess Bast, who led him to the heart-shaped herb, a plant that granted him superhuman strength, speed, and instincts. The warrior became king and the first Black Panther, the protector of Wakanda. 4 tribes agreed to live under the king's rule, but the Jabari tribe isolated themselves in the mountains. Wakandans used vibranium to develop technology more advanced than any other nation, but as Wakanda thrived, the world around it descended into chaos. To keep vibranium safe, the Wakandans vowed to hide in plain sight, keeping the truth of their powers from the outside world. And younger Killmonger says, and we still hide, Baba? Najobu says yes, and Killmonger says why. So then we cut to 1992. We see some kids and they're playing outside. It's dark, they're on a basketball court, and we go up to the apartments above it. And upstairs in this apartment, there's Nujobu and then his friend, and they're discussing a sort of an arms deal that's going to be happening. There's a knock at the door, and when his friend goes over to see who it is, he says that there's a Grace Jones looking chick, and Nujobu knows that that is the Secret Service for Wakanda, and his brother, T'Chaka, is visiting him. T'Chaka then accuses Nujobu of helping Ulysses Claw, an arms dealer, steal vibranium and then backfiring and blowing up some borders in Wakanda with people dying. And then as this is happening, Nujobu's friend reveals himself to be Wakandan, Azuri, and they reveal each other by pulling down their lips. And they've got tattoos on the inside, and that's sort of their identifying mark that they're Wakandan. Nujobu is then ordered to come home, and we sort of cut away from that. And we see the spaceship flying overhead with the little boy looking up. So then we cut to the present day and we see a news report of talking about Wakanda, that is one of the poorest nations in the world, but they don't accept outside help, and saying that the king of Wakanda has been died in a terrorist attack, and that his son T'Challa has now taken over. So then as this is happening, we see T'Challa and his Secret Service. They're going to help rescue T'Challa's ex-girlfriend named Nakia, but she's on an undercover assignment. And they do that, and so we see sort of an opening action sequence with the Black Panther. They rescue her, and then they kind of tell her about the king's coronation and that he wants her to be there. They fly into Wakanda past what we would typically kind of see, I think, for, with the West, when we picture what sort of the African Sahara kind of looks like. And then we fly into this like crazy, beautiful city that's like so technologically advanced. We then meet T'Challa's mother and younger sister Shuri. Shuri and him have a very like typical brother-sister relationship. She makes a lot of fun of him. She does not take him seriously, and she makes fun of him for being king, essentially, which is pretty big little sister energy. So she's very young, but despite that, she's in charge of the innovation and technology, has made major updates to the Black Panther costumes and things like that, as well as their tech all through vibranium. She very much pushes this like new world of innovation and is very behind it. And so there's a lot of discussion about where does Wakanda lie in terms of embracing innovation as well as respecting tradition. We then cut to a scene in a museum where a curator is explaining the artifacts to a man named Eric Stevens, and she explains where they're from. He disagrees with her and he says, no, these are from Wakanda, and he'd like to buy them. And she said, well, they're not for sale. And he says, how do you think your ancestors got this? They took it like they took everything else. He then poisons her. EMTs are called, and when they arrive, they are Eric's accomplices, and they steal the Wakandan artifact as well as a mask. We then cut to the coronation of T'Challa, and all the tribes are there representing their individual cultures and their styles. And at this point, each member of the royal bloodline has an opportunity to challenge T'Challa. And if they win, then they are able to ascend to the throne. None of the other tribes are planning on challenging T'Challa, except for the leader of the Jabari tribe, M'Baku. He decides to, based on his own frustration with the technological advancements, just for the sake of it. And so he has a lack of faith in T'Challa as a strong leader. So in order for this ritual to take place, they have to have the power of the heart-shaped herb stripped from him, so the Black Panther powers, and it's just fighting kind of man to man. So they battle in front of the whole kingdom at the top of this waterfall. At the end, T'Challa is winning and is, about to throw this guy over and says, like, I don't want to throw you off the edge of this river, like, just tap out, like, your people need you. And this is sort of where we get a good look into what kind of person T'Challa is. Like, he doesn't want to kill this guy just to kill this guy. Like, he would prefer not to. He wants everybody to be cohesive and for Wakanda to be strong as one. So once he's defeated M'Baku, he's crowned the Black Panther, and there's a ceremony where he then re-ingests the heart-shaped herb. And this is performed by Zuri, their religious leader, and he becomes a Black Panther. It takes him to a place called the Ancestral Plane. We first see like a flashback sequence of his father's death. And then when we get to the Ancestral Plane, it's a beautiful sort of Sahara desert. It's surrounded by this pink and purple glowy sky that's just amazing. And then his father is there. And T'Challa apologizes for not being able to protect him. And he sort of expresses how he feels scared and not ready to become king. And he asks him, how do I become a great king? And his father says, surround yourself with the people you trust. And he said, it's hard for a good man to be a king. Which I think is interesting, and I think we often think about that. Anybody that we would want to be in power because they're a good person would never want that. And then after this, he's shot back to the present. We then cut to a scene with T'Challa and Nakia. They're walking through the market, and she talks a lot about how she wants Wakanda to provide international aid, and T'Challa is saying no, that it puts their security risk out. He doesn't want the secret out. They need to protect Wakanda. He then talks to W'Kabi, his friend, about all this, and he says, you let the refugees in, you bring their problems with them. Which I think essentially is a big vibe we have here in the West right now with how we feel about immigration. Despite the fact that all of us here, for the most part, are immigrants. We've just decided at some point it was fine for our families to do it, but nobody else. Interesting take that some people have. Wakanda then gets news of the theft of the artifact from the museum, that Claw did it, and he plans to sell it to Korea. So they deliberate with the council about what to do, and T'Challa agrees that he's going to go with Okoye and Nakia. So the three of them travel to Korea. Before they go, Shuri goes through all the tech that she's done that upgrades the suit and all the stuff. It's very like James Bond explanation essentially for what all the new tech is. Cut to Korea. Nakia and Okoye are dressed very Western. Okoye's even got a wig, which he hates and thinks is a disgrace. They go into an underground casino and speakeasy kind of thing, and T'Challa runs into a CIA agent that knows his identity of the Black Panther, but doesn't know Wakanda's secret. He just knows that there's a king of this really poor third world nation that runs around in a Black Panther suit. And Claw is actually there to sell the artifact to this particular CIA agent. A fight then breaks out when T'Challa realizes that it's all a setup, and Claw attempts to escape. We then get to see Shuri's tech in action. There's a big action sequence car chase with Okoye and Shuri and Nakia and Claw, and they're all doing that. And eventually they get Claw and they get him into custody and they interrogate him. Agent Ross is the one that does, and Claw is talking to him. He's like, no, like, look, like, you don't understand, like, King T'Challa. Like, you don't understand what's happening. You don't understand Wakanda. And here's some quotes. Claw says, what do you actually know about Wakanda? Agent Ross says, shepherds, textiles, cool outfits. Claw says, it's all a front. Explorers searched for it for centuries. El Dorado, the Golden City. They thought they could find it in South America, but it was in Africa the whole time. A technological marvel, all because it was built on the most valuable metal known to man. They call it the gift. And you can see that Agent Ross, like, doesn't really know what to believe. Eric Stevens then comes to get Claw out, and there's a bit of a shootout. Agent Ross is shot in the crossfires. He's trying to step in front of Nakia so she doesn't get shot. And then rather than pursue Claw, they take Agent Ross back to Wakanda, where the technology can save his life because of what he did for Nakia. This goes against Okoye's advice. She's worried that their secret is going to get out once Agent Ross knows what Wakanda actually is. Sort of as Eric is escaping with Claw, T'Challa notices a necklace with a ring on it that looks just like the one he has from his father. T'Challa then, when they get back, tells W'Kabi, who's the representative for the border tribe, that Claw escaped, and he says, 30 years with your father with no change, and with you I thought it would be different. So we can see that his people are starting to lose faith in him. We then cut to a scene where Eric attacks Claw. He reveals all his scars and that he's Wakandan, and that he's got all these little scars on his body, one for each kill he's made over the course of his life. T'Challa then decides to confront Zuri about N'Jobu, since Eric wore that same necklace that belonged to him. Zuri explains that N'Jobu was on an assignment in America and saw the horrific treatment and oppression of the Black people that lived there, and he lost faith in the isolationism of Wakanda, and that he fell in love with an American woman, and they had a baby. And then we cut to some flashback sequences where we see what happened. And essentially what happened was that when T'Chaka found out about what N'Jobu did, he was obviously very upset that he helped Claw steal the vibranium, but N'Jobu felt justified because, to quote Zuri, had been radicalized by what he saw in America. And here's a quote. The leaders have been assassinated, communities flooded with drugs, they are overly policed and incarcerated. All over the planet, our people suffer because they don't have the tools to fight back. And so this is essentially kind of the crux of the argument for why they need to no longer engage in isolationism as of Wakanda. So N'Jobu wanted to share the technology of vibranium with people around the world who needed help. But, as they're having this conversation, and Zuri then reveals that he is Wakandan, N'Jobu gets quite angry and tries to kill him. T'Chaka steps in and actually ends up killing N'Jobu. And T'Chaka swears Zuri's secrecy, that no one can ever know that this is what happened. And they leave. They leave the boy, who eventually becomes a U.S. Navy SEAL. And this is a quote. And they leave. And the child, we left him. We had to maintain the lie. We then see Killmonger bring the body to Wakanda of Claw, and he meets with Wakabi at the border. We then cut to Agent Ross, who is very confused. He wakes up in Shuri's lab, and this is where he realizes that Claw was right, that Wakanda has been telling them a lie. And they get the news that Eric has entered Wakanda. T'Challa then tells Nakia what his father did, and he says, he just can't believe that his father isn't who he thought he was. And I think this is, obviously in far less extreme circumstances, but I think this is something that we all come to in our lives as adults, is that we think of our parents one way, and then one day we wake up and realize, oh, yeah, that's not accurate. That's just how I thought of them when I was a kid. And I think T'Challa's took his father dying for him to really see him. And he said this line, which I really like: my uncle betrayed us, but my father might have created something even worse. And I think this is another great part of this movie, and we'll see this more through the character of Killmonger or Eric Stevens, is essentially the bad guy's got a point. And you can see how people get there. You can see how systemic oppression creates anger, and the justification of being able to push back, possibly even violently, is, when you see the full context of something, quite reasonable. So it's a fascinating film in a way where these both T'Challa and Killmonger or Eric, when mirrored together, are just two sides of the same coin. They're around the same age. They come from what would have been the same background, but one of their dads went left and the other one went right. And then here's the byproducts of this. And both of them feel justified in their choices and also full of doubt. And I think the beautiful, nuanced part of this film is you're able to agree with both of them at different times in the film. Killmonger is not a bad guy totally. He has taken a justifiable concept, for sure. Why on earth would you not want to, follow in his father's footsteps, who wanted to, empower people who are being oppressed? But he takes that and he twists it, and that's what makes him a bad guy. Agent Ross, we then cut to that, and he explains who Killmonger is. Essentially, he's U.S. Black Operations, nicknamed Killmonger because he literally just murders people. Killmonger is then brought in front of T'Challa and the other leaders of the tribes, and he reveals himself as N'Jobu's son. And he tries to claim the throne on the basis that there is 2 billion people out there that look just like him that need to be liberated, and that T'Challa is not a strong leader and that he's not doing enough for his people. And, him and T'Challa have this conversation where T'Challa says, I'm doing something for Wakanda. And Killmonger says, aren't we all from Africa? That means we're all your people. Killmonger then challenges T'Challa to combat so that he has his birthright in order to claim the throne if he wins. Nobody wants him to do it, but T'Challa chooses to honor tradition and agrees. And so he has the power of the Black Panther stripped from him, and they fight. And this is a long action sequence. I won't explain the nitty-gritties to it, but essentially it's exactly the same sequence we see before, but the entire kingdom isn't watching. And the first one is shot in these beautiful, bright colors. It's almost a rainbow effect with the different costumes. And this is later in the day. It's very dark. It's very cloudy. It is a very different vibe. It's got this whole darkness to it. And as they're engaging in this fight, Killmonger explains that he's been waiting his whole life to do this, that he's trained and he trained in Black Ops and has been killing people just so that he can get to and kill T'Challa. So T'Challa does get really injured and then is thrown off the edge of the waterfall by Killmonger, who is then crowned king, or is the Black Panther. Nakia and Shuri and the Queen Mother escape. And then meet up with Okoye, who ultimately decides not to go, that she's going to uphold tradition, saying, I am loyal to that throne no matter who sits upon it. Where Nakia is very clear that her loyalty is to people and not a concept. And this film is amazing, and there's so much that I'm not able to get into. Nakia and Okoye are very interesting characters in and of themselves, their own particular contrast of being similar age women growing up in the same place who just have very different viewpoints on nationalism and tradition and things like that. So this is, again, like, I feel like the more I do the podcast, the more I feel like I can never do the films justice. But this is, in particular, I'm getting that vibe. So then we see the ceremony where Killmonger ingests the heart-shaped herb. He goes to the ancestral plane, but first we, again, just like T'Challa, see him witnessing his father's death, and then he's in his apartment that he found his father dead in, but we have that same beautiful pink-purple sky that we saw for T'Challa's journey to the ancestral plane. And his father expresses concern that the Wakandans will never accept him as his own, and that N'Jobu, he then expresses some regret that he didn't take Eric back to Wakanda. And he expresses all this remorse, and Eric, or Killmonger, doubles down on his opinion, and this makes N'Jobu cry. And he also, in this period, says the sunset there are the most beautiful in the world. And so their scene in the ancestral plane ends pretty suddenly, and Killmonger wakes up very scared and very frightened, very panicked and angry. And this is in direct contrast with T'Challa, who woke up filled with hope from speaking with his own father. Killmonger then orders the rest to be incinerated of the heart-shaped herb so that nobody can challenge him, that he will always just be the Black Panther, that nobody else can do it. Nakia manages to extract one before, and then she runs off. We then cut to a scene where Killmonger is speaking to the tribal leaders. He says, quote, where I'm from, when black folks start revolutions, they never had the firepower or resources to fight their oppressors. And all of that ends today. And his goal is to arm oppressed people all over the world, so when they rise up, they will see him as a leader and he will conquer and rule all of them. And that's where the twist is, right? So we're with him in the beginning. Yes, let's rise up. All the oppressed people should not be oppressed. This is great. We need to give people resources in order for them to no longer be oppressed. People need tools in order to help. People need enough. I'm with you. But then there's that twist, and that's the portion of Killmonger's character that's so brilliant, and what makes him such an interesting bad guy is you're with him at the beginning. He yes ands one too many times, and you're like, yeah, no, I'm not with you on the whole conquering the world thing, but I'm with you on the helping oppression thing. But he convinces Wakabi, and so his army of the border control is then now assisting them, and Wakanda is now going to distribute their shipments of weapons to different operatives all over the world. And then we cut to Nakia, Shuri, and the Queen Mother, and Agent Ross, and they're fleeing to the Japari tribe for aid because, like we've said before, they're isolated in the mountains and they're not really involved with the other four tribes. And there they find T'Challa, who survived being thrown over the waterfall, but is unconscious, and the Jabari rescued him sort of as repayment for sparing M'Baku's life. And they thank him profusely. M'Baku says, say one more word and I'll feed you to my children. And they're all really quiet, and M'Baku says, I'm kidding, we're vegetarians. And that's kind of my favorite line of the whole movie. That made me laugh. It was very unexpected. T'Challa's then healed by the herb that Nakia has had. The power of the Black Panther returns to him, and he goes to fight Killmonger. who also has now then been dressed in one of the tech suits, the Black Panther suits that Shuri had made as a prototype. We now have a very large action sequence that goes on for a while. So I'm not going to explain all of it. Essentially, we've got Eric and Wakabi and that army on one side, and we've got Shuri and Nakia and Ross and all that on the other side, and they're battling. Eventually, Okoye and her army challenge Wakabi, and they stand down, and so that's sort of resolved out there. They end up stopping the weapons from being distributed, and then T'Challa and Killmonger fight one-on-one in the mine for the vibranium. They are battling back and forth. Eventually, there's a little defect in Killmonger's suit. And he's stabbed, and T'Challa wants to have him healed. He doesn't want him to die. And Killmonger refuses. He wants to die as a free man. He doesn't want to be in prison. He doesn't want to deal kind of with the consequences of his actions. And T'Challa kind of shows him as he's dying the sunset in Wakanda, just as a callback to his father. That the Wakanda sunsets are the most beautiful in the world. And then he dies peacefully, feeling connected, I think, to that ancestral plane as his father. We then have like an after scene where they're in the old neighborhood of where Eric grew up and was left by his father when he died, and where his ancestry was sort of denied by Wakanda when they didn't want their secret to be left out. And T'Challa establishes an outreach center in that area to be run by Nakia and Shuri without saying it out loud in honor of Eric and the memory of the little boy that probably didn't have to become what he did if they hadn't been so scared of their secret getting out. And that is Black Panther. I hope I did a good job, guys. Like I said, I'm not going to go too far into the nuance on this film because I just feel like I'm not necessarily the right person to be lecturing on Black culture and identity. I will be able to do it a little more in the next Ryan Coogler film I do when I do Sinners, just because it has a lot of discussion about like colonialism in Ireland, and that's where my family's from, so I feel like I can speak to that a lot more. But nobody wants to hear some white lady lecture about Black culture. So I'm just talking about the movie. This film is great. I have nothing but good things to say about it. It's a 5 out of 5 on Letterboxd for me. I love it, and I really recommend it. Happy Thursday.